Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this evening. My name is Chris Entz. I'm a CFP and member of the support team here at Advice, and thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are going to be talking about survivor scenarios, longevity, early death, long, healthy retirements, how longevity and potentially premature death can affect your retirement plans. It's not always the most sunny topic, but it's a really, really important topic. And for those of you that are on the platform right now, you'll have noticed we've built in a bunch more functionality around survivor modules. We've talked about it in some office hours sessions recently. So we want to show you what that looks like, explain why this is really important, and then take a look at three case studies today. Really gonna see if we can stretch ourselves out, look at a bunch of different scenarios, and of course, answer your questions. So if you have questions as we're working through, please use the Q&A tab. Send us your questions. We'll get to as many as we possibly can as we're working through our topic and our case studies today. So I'll pass things off to Owen to kick us off.
Great, thanks, Chris. So yeah, let's kind of get started here. So my name's Owen, advice only financial planner, CFP, and the founder of Advice. And yeah, as Chris mentioned in this webinar, we're going to go through survivor scenarios, longevity, and so it's not just survivor scenarios. We think about couples, but from a longevity perspective, this is also going to impact individuals as well. So we want to highlight some of the things to think about, especially when you're enabling different strategies within your plan, AI strategies, how that impacts your plan, both if you have a long and healthy retirement, and if you have maybe a shorter life expectancy, shorter retirement as well. And we're going to get started. We're just going to ground ourselves in some of the basics around survivor scenarios and longevity. We're going to go through a couple slides here just to kind of start the discussion. As Chris said, we've got three case studies mocked up. So we're going to go look through three different examples, things to think about in your retirement plan as well. So let's get started. So we're going to take a look at longevity planning, opportunities and challenges. We'll look at survivor scenario planning, opportunities and challenges, three different case studies. So retired couple, younger couple where insurance still is a factor, and then a single retiree. And again, this is where, longevity planning, it's not just about couples, it's also about individuals and how that changes the strategies you might be enabling as part of your retirement plan. Now, the first thing we want to talk about is what is longevity? So, one of the things that you'll probably see if you Google longevity or longevity in Canada is that longevity is somewhere around 82. Now, there's a couple things to think about when we talk about longevity because longevity is not equal for everybody. And the reason is that when you see that 82 number or 86 number for longevity in Canada, they're assuming longevity from birth. They're assuming the entire Canadian population. And so there's a couple things to highlight there in terms of assumptions. One is that the table we're looking at here is actually something called the Pensioners Longevity Table. So this is from FP Canada, Financial Planning Canada. So they manage the CFP designation across Canada. And this is the table that CFPs should be using when working with their clients to understand longevity. And the way to read it is that depending on your current age, you'll kind of go across and understand, what's the probability of living to a certain age. So 50% probability for, a male living to age 89 if they're currently 65. And that's an important factor because if you've already reached the age of 65, you've passed a whole bunch of risks that will affect somebody that's younger. So your current age will also impact your longevity as well. That's why this number 89 is maybe higher than the average longevity for Canada. Now, the other factor here, the reason why this longevity is maybe a little bit higher than, average for Canadians at age 65 is because this is the pensioners' longevity. And so this is extremely interesting. And if you know Alexandra McQueen, she's the one that sort of, clued me into the difference here. She talks about it a lot. And one of the factors here is that when they do actuarial analysis of pension plans, one of the things they realize is that pensioners who have, above average income or have obviously a pension in retirement, they tend to live a longer and healthier retirement. And there are probably a number of factors there. It could be access to, just health, mental health, financial health. All of those will impact longevity as well. And so It's important to highlight that the longevity for the average Canadian might be different than for somebody like you attending this call because you might have finances top of mind. You might be in a good financial health, physical health, mental health. Now, this is average, of course. So, everybody's going to be on one side or the other. Nobody's going to hit the exact average typically, but it's also good to highlight that for, people with finances, good finances, top of mind, you might have a longer life expectancy than the average. Now, we typically, when we're planning, we go to mid 90s. So this is why we're doing kind of mid 90s as a default is, for a couple in particular, there's a fairly good chance that you're going to live, either one partner is going to live into your mid 90s here. Now, Chris, just let me know if there's any questions around this, but this is why on the platform, you probably notice default life expectancy is quite long from a default anyway. Now, planning for long and healthy retirement. So when we're creating a retirement plan, we usually look at two things. So we're definitely going to look at a long and healthy retirement. So we want to make sure money doesn't run out by the end of retirement. This is that longevity risks that we're always talking about. So we want to create a retirement plan that at least runs into the mid 90s, early 90s. And the reason why we do that is we're sort of stress testing here to make sure we're not running out of money by late retirement. However, we also want to look at scenarios with a shorter life expectancy. And a shorter lifespan, it's going to have impacts on things like the type of income you receive, survivor benefits, taxes you might be paying. So, again, from a prudent financial planning, retirement planning perspective, long and healthy retirement scenario, but also additional scenarios for shorter life expectancy as well. Now, there's a couple factors here. So there's five main things that will impact a survivor scenario. So one is definitely the loss or reduction of government benefits. We'll take a look at it when we look at the different case studies, but there are different survivor benefits or no survivor benefits for certain government benefits. Now, the other factor is that if you have a defined benefit pension plan, there's no survivor benefit there, or there might be a reduction. So it's important to understand what's the survivor benefit that you get for your DB pension. Now, the reduction of income splitting or tax credits, another big factor. So when we go from a couple to an individual, we might have lost the ability to split income in retirement. And then, of course, there's the rollover of accounts and assets and any insurance that might get paid out. So it could be a term insurance or it could be a whole life insurance policy. Now, that's going to be a factor, but it might not be as big an impact as you think because the purchasing power goes down over time, and we'll see that as well. Anything I'm missing so far, Chris?
Nope, not so far.
Okay, so let's do a quick intro on the benefits that you might get and how they might roll over in a survivor scenario. So CPP, you get a death benefit of $2,500. There's also a child benefit if you have children under the age of 18 or 25, depending if they're in post-secondary. But the big one is the CPP survivor benefit. So this depends on the age of the survivor, depends on your pension of the deceased. So that's also going to be a factor as well. We'll take a look at that in more detail when we get into the case studies. Now, CPP survivor benefits depends on the age. So if you're before age 65, you'll get a certain amount based on the age 65 calculated amount. If you're after age 65, it's going to be different. So it's going to be 60% of the calculated amount up to a maximum. And this is going to be an important factor as well. So if you have a couple and they're both close to the maximum CPP benefit, it could be that you experience quite a large reduction here because you can only have up to the max CPP for any individual. So two couple, both with max, they're going to see essentially one CPP benefit disappear in a survivor scenario. So there's the integration of those two benefits that's going to be very important. OAS, no survivor benefit. So we'll see that when we look at the case study. Big impact in the survivor scenario. Also might impact when we choose to start some of these benefits as well. Okay, so let's go over to the case study. Anything else here, Chris?
Just as you're jumping into the platform, we had one question that just was asking about, is it better to reduce life expectancy in the advanced settings or to set it or to use the AI strategies to play around with specifically where the end of the plan is?
Yeah, good question. So for those who aren't familiar, in the AI strategies, it's already evaluating different life expectancies for us. So here it's got survivor scenarios. In 5-year increments, it's going to evaluate life expectancy. We can see the impact on estate value or success rate, but you can also set a very specific life expectancy in the advanced options here. Now, the reason why you might want to use the AI strategies is because it gives you just sort of a round idea of when life expectancy, what sort of impact might be on the plan. Again, we don't typically know, when we're going to pass away. So 5-year increments gives us a sense of, what's the impact to the plan, the success rate, the estate value. However, if you for some reason know that you have a shorter life expectancy, again, maybe a bad health diagnosis, you may choose to use the advanced options to very specifically have a life expectancy of 2 more years, 3 more years, 4 more years. So maybe the 5-year increments don't affect you in the same way, and you want to have a very specific life expectancy there. That might be one reason why you want to have something more specific using the advanced options. That's why that functionality exists. It's sort of the general versus the very specific if you obviously know you have a shorter life expectancy.
Oh, and one more thing just about, and we can highlight this in the case studies as we go through, but just a question about the maximum CPP. So they just want a clarification about what the maximum CPP could be. So I understand correctly that the maximum will be to calculate 60% of the passed away spouse plus the CPP of the survivor. Can you confirm that and just kind of speak to what the maximum amount could be?
Yeah. So unfortunately, CPP survivor benefit calculations are not super straightforward. There's actually two types of reductions. So the first one is that sort of max CPP reduction. Even that's gotten more complicated now because we have CPP base and CPP enhancement. So there's actually two different CPP survivor calculations. They do work slightly differently. But the way to think about it is yes, if you are at, if you're 10% from the max CPP benefit, even though you are technically, you could have 60% of the deceased's CPP benefit, you're going to be capped because there's only 10% more room. So even though you might be eligible to receive more, you cannot receive more than the maximum for an individual. But again, it's not quite so straightforward because there's also a second reduction that takes into account both your CPP and their CPP. And so you might even not even get the maximum depending on the exact situation. So yeah, everybody's slightly different, depends on how much base you have, how much enhancement you have. But in a general sense, yes, you can't have more than the max for an individual.
All the more reason to be thankful that advice now does the calculation for you, and we no longer have to
Yeah.
do this on the side of our desk.
Yeah. Yeah. There's way too much nuance there. So it does make it quite a bit easier. Yeah. Okay.
Excellent.
So let's take a look at this case study. So let's familiarize ourselves with who we're working with. So this is Sam and Luis. They're both 65. Let's take a look at their financial assets here. So fairly good net worth, 1.2 million. And let's take a look at Discovery because I think there's a bit more here. So we've got 1.3 million starting off. We've got some RSP balances, small locked-in account, non-registered with some capital gains here we can see, and a TFSA as well. They've got a home, and I think the other factor within this one is we've got a pension. So Sam here has a pension, 56,000 a year, fully indexed to inflation, but only 60% survivor benefits. So that's going to be a factor within this case study is that in the event that Sam passes away earlier in retirement, there's going to be a fairly sizable 40% of 56,000, fairly sizable reduction in Luis what they receive. So that's kind of where we are here. I don't think we have insurance. No, we do have insurance in this one. So we have a term life insurance policy, but we can see it started in 2006, ends in a 20-year term. So it ends in 2026. So it may not be a factor in their retirement plan unless, in this case, Luis passes away quite early. But there's also a whole or universal. So this one will be a factor. We've got Sam, who's insured, still paying into it, $50,000 death benefit, with Luis is the entire beneficiary of this. So depending on, when Sam might pass away, we'll see this whole life policy get paid out in the projections. Okay, any other factors? Maybe we should take a look at CPP and OAS actually before we get into this one. So we are fairly close to the maximum. Now, again, the maximum changes with CPP enhancement, but we're fairly close to the maximum. We've got old age security at the max. and Luis, not quite at the maximum, so a little bit more chance of survivor benefits here. But yeah, definitely important that yeah, we'll see quite a reduction in CPP in both of these scenarios here. Okay, so let's take a look at the projection itself. So here we have enabled some AI strategies already. So we've got CPP at age 70 for Luis. We've got OAS at age 70. We're doing an RSP meltdown here. So we're drawing down money faster in early retirement. Remember, they've got a pension and they've got quite a bit of registered assets. So there's a lot of taxable income here. And so we're basically maxing out those first couple tax brackets for both of them. So we're getting that money out a little bit more liquid. I think we had gone through this in the RSP meltdown case study, so you could always take a look at that one as well. What else did we enable here? So we've got CPP at 70 for Sam, um, and they're both living until age 95. So now we'll take a look at a shorter life expectancy just to see what that looks like. Now, what's interesting is we can see at the end of their, long and healthy retirement, we still see that whole life policy get paid out. But in today's dollars, the purchasing power has gone down. So future dollars, definitely $50,000 getting paid out. But of course, looking 20 plus, 30 plus years in the future, the purchasing power of that's kind of gone down as well. So one of the kind of downsides with that whole life policy. So let's take a look at a couple of the survivor scenarios, and we'll take a look at how we can make it more successful. So Luis here, Luis is going to have a bigger impact. Now there's a couple things to highlight already. So we've simulated if I think Sam here passes away at age 75, and we've got all the same parameters that we had in the first long and healthy retirement, but now we see some changes. So we see a fairly large reduction in CPP, so from 41,000 a year down to 23. Again, probably hitting that maximum, right, where we're not getting the full 60% we would otherwise expect. Old age security again is going down, so we're going from 23 to 11. Again, they both are in this scenario choosing to delay until age 70, so we've got above the 8,500 max. And we've got the insurance payout, but also a big reduction in the pension. So big impact for Luis is that Sam's pension with that 60% survivor benefit goes down from 56,000 to 33. So fairly big impact for Luis here. And we will look at net worth, not nearly as healthy, and same with success rate. If we go back to the original scenario, long and healthy retirement, they were at 94%, a little bit of risk there at age 75, but still a fairly healthy plan, fairly healthy net worth with quite a bit of TFSA assets left over. But yeah, in Luis's survivor scenario, we can see the impact here of the loss of the pension, the loss of the CPP, the loss of the OAS, and the combination of those, plus the extra taxes. We can see that the tax has pretty much stayed the same, a little bit of a reduction, 23,000 to 18, 19,000. But Luis's taxable income is much smaller. So way less taxable income, but still paying almost the same amount of tax because we've lost the impact or the benefit of income splitting. Any questions so far here, Chris, or should we take a look at how to improve it?
Um, let's take a look at one question or a few questions here. So the first one was, do you mind just showing, there's a question about how do you create a survivor scenario from an existing plan? So maybe
Oh, yeah.
just make a copy of the original scenario and just, we've made it a little bit simpler, just prepared some of these scenarios, but just show what the steps would be to go through that to actually create that survivor scenario.
Yeah, good question. So we've got our base scenario here and we're happy with the way it looks. So I would highly recommend creating that base retirement plan first, the one that has a long and healthy retirement. Do all your optimization, make sure it looks good, because when we make a copy, all of those, overrides and particular parameters, they're all going to get copied to the copy as well. So what we want to do is we want to take our base, we're happy with the way it looks, good retirement, good spending, by the way. They're spending 155,000 early retirement, 107, 108,000 in mid-late retirement. We're going to make a copy of this, and then we're going to take a look at these survivor scenarios. So we're going to rank by area and strategy. We're going to go down to the survivor scenarios, and we're going to choose life expectancy of 75 for Sam. So again, it's kind of evaluating all of these for us. So we're going to enable that one. And we're just going to recalculate in this copy. And now we can see those different impacts. So we've got the insurance paying out, same impacts to OAS and CPP, pension. Basically, the platform has done all that for us by selecting Sam's life expectancy to be just 75 versus the original 95. That's it. That's all it takes to create a survivor scenario. So you can, if you optimize your base plan after, you can even delete this survivor scenario, make another copy of your base plan, and rerun that survivor scenario quite quickly. Um, does that maybe address the question, Chris?
It does. And I think that just one other thing to mention, it might be a best practice when you create that survivor scenario. We're going to highlight this as we go through the case studies to look back through the AI strategies that you've selected already. Perhaps deactivate them and see if other strategies are recommended. Because once we change life expectancy of partner, perhaps what made sense when we were long healthy may no longer make sense anymore.
Yeah, great point. So, yeah, you could even get even deeper into this. RSP meltdown might become a factor. Again, if you have too big of an RSP in a survivor scenario, that can be an issue. Yeah, so there might be different conclusions that you come to if that's a potential risk within the plan. Okay,
One
so
more
let's get rid
technical
of this.
question, Owen,
Oh yeah.
as you're deleting things here. So there's a question about how is CPP affected per early death of a spouse if you elect to take CPP later? So like Sam and Louise, if they take it at 70, does it become 60% of the increased amount? Is it 60% of the 65 amount? Does that change the calculation?
Yeah, good question. So the survivor benefit is always based on the calculated amount at age 65. So if the deceased decided to start it early at age 60 or delay it until age 70, that doesn't actually impact the amount of the survivor benefit that you might receive. Now, depending on when you started your benefit, the survivor, that can have a slight impact. So if you did decide to start CPP at age 60, there is a tiny little adjustment there that happens in a survivor scenario. So there's almost a little addition because you started your CPP benefit early. When they do the integration, there's a little benefit that you might get. But otherwise, the age that the deceased decided to start their CPP actually has no impact. It's always based on the calculated amount at age 65.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, Owen.
Okay, so let's take a look at Luis. So we know that this doesn't look good. Luis is probably looking at this retirement plan and saying, "Oh shoot, like what am I going to do if, my partner Sam passes away earlier at age 65?" And that's what we want to explore in the next scenarios. We want to see how do we make this more successful. So we've mocked up a scenario with, still the same age 75 life expectancy for Sam, but we've looked at how do we make this perhaps a little bit better. And we were looking at things like a reduction in spending, less on travel and early retirement. So I'll show you how we made those changes here within the plan. So we've gone down here to the table, we've gone down to other spending, and what we've basically said is that in a survivor scenario for Luis, we know that we need to cut spending. And this is something that we hope to add as an AI strategy in the future is just looking at different levels of spending reduction if you enable an AI strategy, survivor scenario strategy. So in this case, we've done it manually. We've gone to other spending. We've added a $20,000 reduction in the event that Sam passes away earlier in retirement. And this does help make the plan more successful. So that's something you can explore as you're exploring survivor scenarios, as you're seeing the reduction in benefits or pension income. Louise has a fairly big impact because of all the reductions in income that she's now not receiving anymore. So a spending reduction seems to be necessary. Now, the other thing we can do is we can reduce spending in early retirement as well. So just leaving a little bit more assets for that sort of age 75. If this is a big concern for them, that might be something that they want to look at as well. So we just reduced travel spending a little bit. If I look at personal here, we've got a slight reduction. Not big. They were planning to spend 30,000 a year. Now it's 25, but it does leave a little bit more assets available in their mid 70s if that were to happen to Sam in the future. Now, the other thing that we can look at is in this case, we were deciding whether or not we should take a 100% survivor pension for Sam's pension. So, again, default is age 60, other pensions default is age sorry, not age 50, but a 60% survivor benefit. Sometimes it's a 50% survivor benefit, but you can often opt for a larger amount. So what we did is in the table for Sam, when we look at Luis's survivor pension, we've looked at a larger amount. So we've kind of overridden this to a larger amount that's 100%. If we go back to Sam, it's a slightly lower amount. So here it's maybe 52,000 a year. There's often a cost to having a 100% survivor benefit. So there's a lower lifetime amount, but that does give us a 100% survivor benefit for Louise. So that might be something that they explore as well within their particular plan. So here we've got 52,000 a year, but then it stays at 52,000 a year in a survivor scenario.
Oh, and do you mind just going back to the table for a second and show where we're seeing that CPP survivor amount come up and just where people can look for it in their own survivor scenarios?
Oh yeah. So here we've got Luis. We've got a column here that gets added CPP survivor benefit. We've got Luis's CPP here, and then we can see the integration. Now we know that Sam's CPP was quite a bit larger than this, but again, the integration between those two means that Luis unfortunately isn't getting the 60% that we would normally expect. So here it's the 21,000 a year that's Luis's base CPP that she's getting, and then also the additional survivor benefit as well.
And a reminder that the numbers that you're looking at there are in future dollars. So one of the reasons why it's nice to look at the tables where they have today's dollars is that these benefits do look quite a bit larger, but we're also talking about 10 years in the future.
Yeah, that's right. Perfect. Now let's take a look at Sam. So Sam's a little bit different. So Sam's survivor scenario, we have similar impacts to CPP benefits and old age security. However, with Sam's pension, there's no reduction because Sam obviously, even if there's a 60% survivor benefit, Sam gets to keep that entire pension amount. So if Louise were to pass away at age 75, Sam's in a slightly different situation than Louise might experience. So this is interesting because now we see some old age security clawbacks. There's actually more income here. So slightly different again for Sam than what Luis would have experienced with the same life expectancy survivor scenario. We also don't see that insurance payout until much later because that was Sam's insurance policy. And we can look at different ways to make it more successful as well. So here, success rate's better. I think for Luis, we had a 32% success rate. This one's a bit better at 47, but still not great. So we might want to look at if that were to happen, how do we make this a little bit more successful? And it's similar sort of insight is that we need a spending reduction here. We've got to reduce retirement spending in a survivor scenario. And again, we might choose different sort of pension options as well. So you can explore that for your own situation, what may make sense in a survivor scenario, just kind of preparing ahead if a spending reduction is required.
Oh, and do you mind taking a look? Just go back to the survivor scenario, the unsuccessful one, or the successful one, because another thing to highlight here in this one, even though the reduction of the pension isn't as much, one of the big impacts to Sam is he's not splitting this income anymore. Income
Mm,
splitting isn't happening in the same way. And so tax becomes a bigger issue. He might, I'm not sure if in this scenario we're seeing that, but we might be looking at OAS clawbacks that he wasn't looking at before because he's losing that ability to split income in retirement.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. You can see the total income here relative to the tax, and then much less income. A big piece of that being, tax-free withdrawals from the TFSA account, but pretty much the exact same tax amount. So much higher tax burden even though we've melted down a significant portion of the registered account by age 75, still a factor. So, if this was a concern, we could even melt down this RSP faster, do more there to get some of those registered assets out before it starts to impact Sam's old age security and taxes later on in retirement. Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. Should we switch over to the next case study, take a look at the insurance impact?
For sure. And I think that just the last thing I'd highlight about this case study is that the reason that we do survivor scenarios within your plan, they're 65. still 10 years away from 75, still could have a long, healthy retirement, but it helps you make decisions in the moment. So when you're looking at saying, well, if Sam passes away, that pension cutoff, that pension reduction from 100% to 60% is a really big deal. If you're able to make that decision, what we can do is we can rerun the plan and say, okay, does it work if you have that lower pension amount, but with that 100% survivor side? Does the plan still make sense for you if we spend a little less in early retirement, but you're still able to do what you want to do? You have a more robust, if somebody passes away, you can survive a little longer. So it helps put some of those decisions into context in the moment. It's not just hypothetical. It helps you make clear decisions in the moment, keeping in mind that longevity is a risk. And premature death or early death can definitely happen as much as long and healthy retirements can happen.
Yeah, and everybody has a different risk tolerance that, you know, what you decide might be different than somebody else just because of the appetite for risk that you might have. So people might be comfortable with that risk. They might want to spend more in early retirement. They might have a larger reduction in spending. But Chris is right. Having those numbers in front of you and seeing the impact at least gives you the information to make a full decision there. Now let's flip over. We've got a younger situation, a younger case study. And we're just going to take a look at how maybe insurance will impact the plan here. Now, we're going to look at a younger couple, but this might impact you if you're still in your kind of 40s, 50s, you're still in that accumulation phase. If you've got another 10 years of accumulation, we're going to show you how, even if you have some term life insurance, that still can be a risk depending on how much you still require that employment income to help you reach your retirement goal. So in this case, let's take a look at who we're working with. So this is Alex and Emma. So Alex and Emma, they're in their mid 30s. I think we've got family. We've got a home purchase here coming up. So no real estate. They're purchasing a home. They've got a mortgage. And let's take a look at their insurance information. So think we're adding this insurance. Let's first start off with their insurance needs analysis. So this can be interesting. This is sort of a broad, very basic insurance needs analysis, but takes a look at your, age, your years until retirement, and your after-tax income, and gives us a sense of how much we might need to cover that potential loss of income in a survivor scenario. So gives us a rough ballpark of what sort of maybe term life insurance we might need to sort of help prevent or protect against that risk. So we see here Alex requires, because of higher income, requires about 1.2 million in term insurance. Emma needs, maybe about $1 million in term insurance. We've added that to the plan. So in insurance, we've got $1 million here. We've also got, I think, some employer coverage, so 250,000. So combination lets us hit that 1.25 million that we were looking for. And then Emma's got 875,000 plus an employer policy for 100,000. Now, it's important to highlight that the employer policies will continue, but these term policies are going to end at some point. So they'll end in 2044 before Alex and Emma are actually at their retirement target. So they're in their mid 30s. These term insurance policies will end at kind of 55, mid 50s, but they're still aiming to retire it at 65. So there's still a 10-year gap there, and we'll see how that can be an impact. Okay, so let's take a look at the projections. We've got our base scenario. So this one looks quite good. So they've got that home purchase. They're building up their retirement assets. They'll retire with about 1.1 million in today's dollars. Home's paid off. Looks like a fairly healthy retirement plan. So as a base scenario, that looks good. That's not a problem. Success rate's 85%. But again, we're so far out that that's again, that's a good benchmark to aim for and fairly reasonable spending. So spending 92,000 a year. They've got their debt payments, not saving a ton when they're first paying off that mortgage, but that's okay. They kind of catch up later on. So overall, good plan. But let's look what happens if one of them were to pass away earlier on, and what are the impacts here? So, a couple things to highlight. We've got a huge insurance payout here. So, if Alex were to pass away, or Emma in this case were to pass away, we've got close to $1 million being paid out. That, of course, gets saved. We need to invest that money. We need to use that for mortgage payments or for living expenses. But what's interesting is it's not quite enough. So even though the needs analysis would suggest we needed that close to $1 million, we can still see we're a little bit short. We did have about $1 million at retirement. Now we've got 500,000. A couple impacts here. So one, we're losing all of Alex's CPP and OAS in the future. So that's a big impact. There's some survivor benefits. So if we go down to the table, so sorry, if Emma passes away, we're getting a bit of a survivor benefit. So even if, you're younger and partner passes away, 30s, 40s, 50s, you're going to receive something, but it's not going to be nearly as much because there's not as many years of contributions in this case. So fairly small CPP survivor benefit. And when we get to retirement, that leads to a fairly big impact on the overall plan. So again, we might want to look at different options here. Um, it could be reducing spending, could be additional insurance. So it just depends on what they want to focus on. But in this case, if we still wanted to have that $1 million insurance policy, we'd have to cut spending by about, $20,000 a year. So we did the same thing down here in others. We reduced the spending as of that survivor scenario. So this could be a factor. Now, what's interesting is that if we look at even a later life expectancy. So let's say that Alex were to have a survivor scenario, so Emma were to pass away, um, but it happens after the term policy expires. Here we're getting the workplace coverage, but we've lost that sort of $1 million policy, 875,000. So again, we see a fairly big impact to the plan. Even though they've had a lot of time to accumulate those assets, they're not quite at retirement yet. So, even in that situation where, you're 5, 10 years from retirement, there still can be a need for some sort of insurance coverage in that case, or a bigger reduction in spending. So sometimes we see that as we're building retirement plans for couples. If we don't have quite the retirement assets that we need and we're still relying on the next 5, 6, 7, 10 years of employment income, that could still be a factor within your plan. So think about survivor scenarios in retirement, but also the lead up to retirement as well. Even in this case, once that term policy expires, we're in a bit of a tougher situation as well. Anything else here to highlight, Chris?
No, I think the only small thing you might want to highlight is just we can see in the table below the charts the pre 65 and the post 65 survivor benefit kind of calculation. And so,
Yeah.
just might be an interesting thing to take a look at to see that how we can look at that benefit change.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so let's take a look here for Alex. Because yeah, you're right. So there's going to be three different changes. Well, in this case, we started at age 65, but maybe we'll show you the one where it's at age 70. And we can see all three changes to that CPP survivor benefit. So we're getting Emma's CPP survivor benefit. That's going to continue all the way through here. But we're going to see that there's a reduction here when Sam reaches or Alex reaches age 65. So again, we've got that pre-65 CPP survivor benefit, 37.5% of the earnings plus a base portion. Unfortunately, usually what we see is that goes down at age 65. So once we get to the calculation that's 60% of the earnings portion, we see a reduction in the survivor benefit. And then once we integrate with the, survivor CPP, we see another reduction. So that's that sort of max calculation, that other reduction that we often see. So we've got the sort of pre-65 survivor benefit, we've got the post-65 survivor benefit, and then we've got the integrated survivor benefit, which can be lower again. This is one reason why sometimes delaying CPP until age 70 can make sense. If a shorter life expectancy is maybe expected, for whatever reason, health diagnosis, delaying the survivor CPP until age 70 helps us avoid some of these reductions. So we've got the reduction that happens at age 65, but we've got the other reduction that happens when we integrate those two benefits. So there could be a good reason to delay CPP until age 70 if you expect a survivor benefit to be receiving a survivor benefit in the future.
Oh, and do you mind just going back and showing where that insurance needs analysis is? Um,
Yeah. So
so
it's
it's been
here in the
added.
foundation. Yeah, so here in
Exactly.
the foundation section under insurance needs analysis, three types of insurance. And again, I would recommend speaking with your insurance advisor, insurance broker, about what your specific needs are. But this will give you a ballpark. So this is basic life insurance needs, looking at if people rely on your income. So do you have a spouse or partner who relies on your income? Do you have children, dependents who rely on your income? And then what's your after-tax monthly income amount? And then how far until retirement? So how long do we still need that income to reach our retirement planning goals? We've also got two other types of insurance. So critical illness. So again, specific types of illness, you'll see a payout in that case. We're looking at basically after-tax income, months of coverage required. So do we need 6 or 12 months of coverage? Do we need some income replacement? Do we need some additional costs for childcare or medical equipment costs? It'll give us a rough estimate of how much there. And then the other big one is long-term disability. So big factor if you're a couple or an individual. Again, long-term disability, very common, much more common than like life insurance. This gets paid out more, can be quite expensive, but if you have it through your employer, you just want to see how much coverage you're getting and is that enough if you were to experience a long-term disability.
Great. Thank you, Owen.
Okay, so I think I gotta switch over to the last case study unless there's any other questions here.
Not currently. So just a reminder that the last case study we want to take a look at, I'll introduce it a bit as Owen's pulling it up. We want to take a look at a single retiree. So you can see that there are a lot of effects on a couple or loss of CPP, loss of OIS, loss of pension, loss of income splitting. But this kind of planning is valuable to do as a single retiree as well. Because when we look at healthy, long and healthy retirement versus a shorter life expectancy, we may start to see different strategies. And we may want to consider different strategies and see if I live for a shorter period of time versus a longer period of time, what are the different strategies that are being recommended? And then what does that mean in terms of what I'd like to do, not knowing when I'm going to pass away? So I'll let Owen take this a little bit more closely, but that was our goal with this case study here.
Yeah, and it actually applies to couples as well. So, we often think about survivor scenarios, we think about couples and what does that look like in retirement. Um, but for individuals, we also want to explore life expectancy because it may impact the type of strategies that we choose to enable as part of the plan. So, timing of government benefits, CPP old age security. Obviously, there's a break-even point there. If we look at life expectancy, we might come to different conclusions with an earlier life expectancy versus a later life expectancy. Now, the same thing happens for couples as well. So I mentioned this in a previous webinar. I would often recommend four different scenarios for couples. One, both long and healthy retirement. One with one partner passes away early in retirement. Another one with the other partner passing away early in retirement. And the fourth scenario would be what happens if you both pass away earlier in retirement? Because it could be different conclusions around estate value, taxes, spending. So there might be different conclusions. Even the timing of government benefits might be different as well. Now, you could come to the same conclusion. So we're going to see that here. It could also reinforce that, yes, maybe delaying those benefits is still the right thing to do. Now let's take a look at this one. So this one we have, just looking at my cases, Martha here. So let's take a look at Martha. Martha is 64, still a bit of employment income, so a year before retirement. And yes, fairly significant financial assets here. So we've got high income, 1.3 million in registered accounts. So RSP meltdowns, definitely part of the plan. We've got a little bit in TFSA, so clearly maximizing the registered accounts, probably high income before retirement, bit of non-registered assets as well. Could be an employee share purchase plan. So we've got a situation with a lot of financial assets. Now, I think in this one, we've already done a little bit of optimization. So let's take a look here. So we've maximized TFSA contribution room throughout retirement. That makes sense. We're melting down the registered accounts. We're shifting that over to the TFSA, more flexible, more liquid. We've delayed both benefits until age 70. That also makes sense. We want to draw more from those registered accounts earlier on in retirement. So we're taking advantage of lower tax rates, mixing withdrawals with the non-registered account. So let's see which RSP meltdown we enabled. So we've got, let's see, take a look here. So CBP at 70, maximize TFSA, RSP. Oh, so we've got an RSP to RIF conversion. So that must be driving a certain minimum amount every year. We could also look at RSP meltdown as well. So in this case, we've got a fairly good plan. We're ending up with 1.3 million in estate value. Um, Pretty good success rate, 74%. Definitely a lot of tax along the way here. So we've got 20,000 or so in tax every year. And now let's take a look at what a survivor scenario looks like, or in this case, a shorter life expectancy. And maybe what I'll do is I'll start with the sort of base scenario. Um, and let's go through and see if we come to some different conclusions. So we'll copy the base scenario. Base scenario was before we optimized everything. So we weren't doing that RSP meltdown. We were starting CVP at age 65, OAS at age 65. So let's see if we come to the similar conclusions, which was CPP at 70, OAS at 70, RSP meltdown. Let's make a copy of this one. And let's just go through. We'll start with that age 85 life expectancy. So we'll filter the strategies here. We'll find survivor scenario, life expectancy at 85. Start with that. And then we're going to rank by estate value, and we're going to see what sort of AI strategies pop out here and whether or not we want that to be slightly different than the original one. So here we've got some spending reductions. But other than that, the top strategy is to do an RSP meltdown. So with a shorter life expectancy, platforms actually suggesting that to maximize estate value, we want to start drawing down the registered accounts faster, much faster than we saw in the original one. So let's enable that. So much faster drawdown of the RSP. It's still saying to delay old age security. So 1.33 million. We're at 1.323, so a slight increase, but that's interesting. So if we enable that one, it's probably pushing out some of these OAS clawbacks. Again, we're being fairly aggressive here with the RSP meltdown. So pushing that out probably helps. Normally, you would assume that delaying OAS wouldn't be the thing to do because of the shorter life expectancy. But this case is interesting because we're melting down the RSP. We have so much taxable income that actually is triggering OAS clawback. So your situation might be different, but in this case, with Martha, we want to avoid those OAS clawbacks. That's why it seems like we're pushing those out. And then CPP is not as late. So actually here it's saying CPP at age 67. So we can enable that one here as well. So it's giving us a bit more room to melt down the RSP. But again, break even age. So it's probably saying, well, let's not delay CPP until age 70 because we don't hit the break even point for Martha, but age 67 still might make sense. So it's interesting that the long and healthy retirement still had Martha delaying CPP, not quite as early. It was going till age 70, but still pretty good conclusion here that we still want to delay CPP a couple years, give us room to melt down the RSP. Delaying OAS for a few more years still makes sense as well. So interesting that we're still in the same direction. We're just not quite as far on some of those things. And here, RSP RIF conversion, so we can do that as well. Probably some pension tax credits that we get, and maybe maximizing TFSA contribution room in retirement. So we can do that as well. So overall, kind of optimized net worth, different conclusions, but same direction. So still delaying CPP benefits, not quite as long, still delaying old age security benefits. Again, not quite as long, but actually further than CPP due to the clawbacks. And definitely could probably spend more in this case as well. So if we look at lifetime spending, probably room to spend a little bit more if we knew that there was a slightly shorter life expectancy. So yeah, increased spending, 18, 6,000, so even 76%. So we could add some more spending to this particular plan. Any other things here, Chris, that we should hit?
No, I just think that that reminder again that you're saying, okay, so Martha's retiring at 64, retiring next year, trying to make decisions about what do I do here? first thing to see in both these scenarios is delaying benefits probably makes sense. Now, she may decide to do something different because there's lots of things you take into consideration when you're deciding to delay or not delay. But by the math, it makes sense no matter what to delay it by a couple of years. So that's really, really good information. It makes sense to melt down an RSP, see how aggressively they want to take a look at that. They could come back to their original optimized plan and say, what does that look like if I'm more aggressive in a similar situation to what it looks like in this shortened plan? So it gives you really, really good information to make decisions in the moment. I know I'm harping on that, but I think that that's where the real value is here because we don't know how long we're going to live, but we can take these shortened and longer decisions and make them a part of a more nuanced decision when we're deciding these big things at retirement.
Yeah. And even the fact that we can delay for a few years and it still makes sense in this case. But the nice thing about CPP is you can start at any point. Old age security, you can start at any point. So as Chris said, we could start with the default assumption that we're going to delay for a couple of years, but we could always just start that at age 65, 66 if there's a decrease in stock market value or some other reason to maybe start those benefits earlier. So it at least confirms the assumption that we want to maybe delay, but there's still some flexibility to start at any point. But I would say that this is the same exercise that we would want to do for a couple, is just confirming whether or not these same conclusions would come from a shorter life expectancy as you would with a scenario with a long and healthy retirement. Again, we might want to melt down that RSP faster, like we saw in this case, even if it causes a little bit more tax to get paid in that sort of base scenario. It might set you up better from an estate perspective or survivor scenario if we do some of those things. So, we've talked about it in previous webinars. Optimized is different for everybody. Sometimes the difference is five or ten or $15,000 in estate value. On $1 million with home equity and everything included, that 10,000 doesn't really matter. So optimized is really depending on what you want to focus on. You might want to have more liquidity. You might want to have, just more access to that money. There's lots of other things to think about other than just pure estate value or estate tax. And this is a good example of that, of maybe melting down that RSP faster, not the mathematically the best, but certainly a good option to consider for a shorter life expectancy. Excellent. Yeah. Any
Owen,
other questions, Chris?
nothing that I've seen, so please feel free to shoot up any questions that are still helpful. Um, so I just had a question that just came up as I was saying that if you have already filled out the insurance that you presently have, will this affect the insurance need calculation?
No, no. So you will enter how much insurance you do have up here at the top. So it's not directly linked. So you can play around with this a little bit, and you can say, well, what if I purchase another 500,000 of term insurance for 10 years or something? Say you're 50, you want to retire at 60, there's still some risk there. You might look at a 10-year policy just to cover some of that risk off. So you can enter in the additional insurance benefit that you might be eligible for. Also, take a look at your employer. Sometimes your employer has some fairly inexpensive coverage, doesn't require, a kind of health checkup or health review. So take a look at your employer to see whether or not you can go from, one or two times salary to 4 or 5 times salary. Some risk there if you obviously leave your employer, so that's not quite the equivalent, but could be an easier way to get some coverage in those last few years before retirement, if that's a risk in your plan.
And just to confirm with how the platform works, the platform is pulling insurance information from the Discovery Insurance tab. So this is for your own information to help you figure out what you should target, how can you think about that. But the information that's going to be pulled in your projections comes from what you've entered in the insurance tab in Discovery. So make sure that those values are right and also the terms are right. So if it is a term policy, and you're saying it's 20 years, it started in 2006, like our example showed before, that's going to be really important because if you're factoring in longevity after that point, it's not going to include that insurance.
Yeah, and Chris is right. If you want to model out what if you did purchase an additional policy, like another 10-year policy, just to bridge the gap, you might add it here, even if you haven't purchased it yet, just to see what the effect is in a survivor scenario on your plan. But yeah, it definitely lets you explore some of those options and see whether or not there's still a need there. in those last 5, 10 years or so.
Great. Well, it doesn't seem like we have any last questions, so I'm going to assume that we've answered everybody's questions about survivor and longevity issues. But thank you so much for joining us. We always really appreciate it. For those of you that haven't found our Reddit community yet, please, if you have questions, check it out. It's at Reddit/advice, and you can find it by clicking community from your from your um, from your from the platform when you log into the platform. So check that out. Come to our next webinar. We've got one more left for the year. We've got an office hours session in December. So come and bring your questions for that. And we'll have lots of new webinar and case study content for the new year. We're starting to plan it out, getting excited about some of the things we'll take a look at in the new year. So thank you so much for joining us. Oh, Owen has one more thing.
No, I was just going to mention, yeah, the one in December, we're going to be looking at the how to prepare for the new year. So, the accounts are going to roll over. We're going to have new sort of tax rates. So we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in the next webinar as well.
Great. Thank you so
Perfect.
much for coming. Have a great rest of
Thanks,
your night.
everybody. Have a good night. Bye.